Yo, what up, friends?
President Donald Trump released an executive order this past week. And I'm going to talk about this one because y'all know homelessness is very close to my heart. And I think it's one of the worst problems we have in this country, and we are just exacerbating it by the things that we do to mental health and to homeless people and things like that. And it's my goal in life to help fix homelessness. Well, President Donald Trump issued a new executive order on homelessness that allows forced hospitalizations in order to clear public spaces. Um, the problem with homelessness, y'all, is not that we have a bunch of homeless people. Yeah, we do. In very large part due to mental health, in very large part to the drug epidemic, in very large part to two things mainly, but other things as well. COVID helped, not helped, but made the problem worse. What does not help is forced hospitalizations. Should there be people that are forced into hospitalizations due to maybe their mental health condition being deteriorated to a point where they can no longer control themselves on the street and are a threat to themselves and to others? Yes, then okay. But this executive order now allows police or others to make that decision on who they believe is in that sort of situation that would deserve this, which kind of harkens back to the ICE deportations and the mass deportations where we're deportating people that don't necessarily need to be deported when we're trying to deport criminals. Now it's like, okay, you're trying to get the most severe of the homeless and mentally ill people off the street, fine, but then that's when you start taking regular homeless people off the street, and that's not one of the biggest issues. The other biggest issue that I didn't mention earlier is the lack of housing. The lack of housing. We have so many abandoned buildings, so many things that could be turned into housing, so many things that could be used, but we don't care in this country because they don't give about homelessness and other things in this country and the mental health epidemic. They act like they care about the fentanyl and drug epidemic, but they don't care about that either. This does not help homelessness. It criminalizes it in a lot of cases. I'm going to do a mind of the professor on this. I know I've been talking about that for a long time, how I was going to do one on homelessness and on mass shootings and on police brutality, and I will do one eventually on all three of those. It's taken me a while now that I've been doing this show to actually be able to put in the research necessary for a mind of the professor, but I promise I will get into one of those soon enough. But we got to be better in terms of helping out our homeless population and especially our mentally ill population. All right, off my soapbox. Into other Trump administration news. Let's get some things out of the way before we get into the main stories that we know everyone is talking about. Harvard versus the federal government. The Trump administration has cut $2 billion from Harvard for alleged mishandling of campus anti-Semitism. A judge has questioned the constitutionality of terminating funding over a possible rights violation. I know we haven't talked about this yet on this program, so I'm going to give you a little bit of my insight into this. Was there anti-Semitism on campuses last year? Yes. During the Israel and Hamas war and the Palestinians being involved, there was a lot of anti-Semitism on campuses. Does that mean that the campuses necessarily let that happen? Not necessarily. On campuses, you have to allow a freedom of protest. Now, did some campuses last year maybe go a little further with there being sometimes vandalism, sometimes fires, other things like that? Possibly. I am not one to determine that, so I am not going to say so. What I can say, though, is that even if Harvard does have their own funding and they don't really need that money that they get from the government, that money from the government is still going to support those Jewish students and is still going to support Jewish faculty and is still going to support programs that will help Jewish people. So, yeah, you're taking the $2 billion away from the university, but you're taking it away from everybody and all those students and faculty that did maybe did nothing wrong in this situation over a few bad actors. That's my issue with this, and I think it should be handled differently. I don't think that universities should be punished because of the fact that there were these protests on campus, because there's always been protests on campus. Plus, that just takes away from the campus being better. Now, I know, obviously, liberal universities, Republican president, there's obviously that, you know, juxtaposition there when you're looking at that situation, but it's still something that it just seems a little over the top for a president to be able to take money away from universities used for research purposes because they have an issue with the way a situation was handled. Now, again, I know some of them did get a little out of control, but I still don't believe that that is a reason that they should be penalized to the point where you're hurting everyone, including the same Jewish people that you're trying to protect. So, anyways, let me know in the comments how you feel about the Harvard case and all the other things we've talked about. I know I should be saying that more. I just wasn't thinking about it. But go ahead and hit that like button as well. Also, Trump has put in an executive order on saving college sports. So, as again mentioned, being a Republican president, Republicans want to help the NCAA in keeping amateurism, while the Democrats would like to make athletes employees. You know how I feel about this situation. I completely despise the NCAA, one of the worst organizations in the history of mankind. Very corrupt. Amateurism is bullshit. These athletes are employees, always have been employees. They're working, and no, a college education is not enough when they have to not only study and go to school, but also have to practice, have to do all of these other things that are involved with being a student athlete. They deserve to be paid so that way they don't have to go work other menial jobs and can focus on not only their education, which apparently is very important, but also the sport that they are being paid to play. All right, moving on into other news, Trump administration news the rest of the time. So first of all, you can't go anywhere without hearing about the Jeffrey Epstein files. What is going on with the Epstein files? Why haven't they been released? If you're looking at both sides of the coin here, the Republican side, especially the people that are attacking Trump from his own base, are saying we campaigned on this being one of our main issues to release the JFK files, so on and so forth. We were told Democrats were on this list. We wanted to expose them as such, and all pedophiles, as we do want to do. But then it turned out, well, maybe there's some people on these lists that they didn't want to necessarily be on this list. So then it became a thing, well, oh no, wait, now it's the Democrats that don't want to necessarily release the list because they have nothing to release. Let's go ahead and talk about exactly what's become of this in the past week. So the DOJ denied the existence of a Jeffrey Epstein client list, contradicting Elon Musk, who we'll get into a little bit, his claims. Donald Trump has criticized the pursuit of the Epstein documents as a hoax, as he is wont to do. He calls everything that's against him a hoax. We know that. DOJ prosecutor Maureen Comey was fired last week. Dan Bongino has clashed with Attorney General Pam Bondi over the transparency of the files. You'll remember a couple weeks ago we mentioned the Attorney General Pam Bondi said she had the list on her desk, then went on to say, no, I was just talking about the overall file that I needed to look through. Then, as Trump hears more things about himself and accusations on him, including from Elon Musk, he starts to bring in all the other things, including releasing the MLK files that no one asked for, including Martin Luther King's family, who posted on Twitter, now released the Epstein files, which was a hilarious burn. Hilarious. They were like, we're not even concerned with our files. We need you to release the real files so that we can lock up these pedophiles that are clearly doing horrendous, horrible, horrible things. Public trust has eroded. 3% approval rating on this issue, which obviously you shouldn't be in support of a pedophile ever. That just would be stupid. Then Ghislaine Maxwell has actually been out of prison for the past couple days to be questioned by the FBI in terms of what has been her knowledge to the Jeffrey Epstein files. Now, there are 100 hours of her, or not hours, there are plenty of hours of her being questioned when she was first put into jail, that she knew something was going to come of this. Well, it came out today that she's now asking for a pardon due to all the extra information that she has given. And we don't even know what that information is, but we do know that President Donald Trump has again been trying to distract all of this, saying, why are we worried about these things that are old, but then bringing up Russiagate hoax and Obama from 2016. So you can't be hypocritical about one issue and not the other. Look, whether we actually see the release of these files or not, which we absolutely need to, because again, all of these pedophiles must be prosecuted and punished to the fullest extent of the law and put under the earth, basically. But we also need to know who leading our country could be involved in that. And allegedly by Elon Musk and others who say that President Donald Trump's names are in those files. If allegedly that is to be the case, well, then we would know why President Donald Trump was trying to deflect from the issue. We would also need to know if he was involved in that. Because, and Bill Clinton, if you want to say that. I know some of y'all out there, oh, well, Bill Clinton flew on the log 26 times to the island. Well, then shit. He needed to be found out too. All of them. As Cat Williams said last year, all lies will be exposed, right? And that's what needs to happen here. And if President Donald Trump is on there with, again, allegations that he is on there, I don't know, but I do know that I have seen him on the news in hundreds of pictures with Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm sorry, I was born in the morning, 5:58 in the morning to be exact, but I wasn't born this morning. And if allegations are to be true, I'm sorry, if you're in hundreds of pictures with this person has called you their best friend, you've called him your best friend, and that was for a period of 10 to 15 years, I would assume you knew, at the very least you knew what was going on, and allegedly, possibly even involved. But again, everybody needs to be exposed. And if President Donald Trump allegedly is on that list, then he needs to be exposed as well. All the people that ever did anything wrong within this alleged pedophile ring need to be exposed. And I'm sorry, but when you're trying to avoid something so much, it definitely casts a side eye towards it. So, what are the updates? We got a little Epstein list, as well as some tariff updates for you. So what is the update on the Epstein list? Well, the latest is that Ghislaine Maxwell met with lawyers and from the DOJ, which is just Trump's lawyer. It just happens to be, which is hint, hint, just happens to be. Anyways, she was then moved after 2 days of questioning to a minimum facility. a minimum strength facility. Now, let me tell you about this minimum strength facility. The main prisoner at this minimum strength facility is a former future housewife of Salt Lake City, Utah. She is the main protagonist in this minimum security federal prison. She runs yoga classes, dance classes that are apparently you have to get on the list to get into. This is considered to be a spa of federal prisons. So the fact that not only was she interviewed by President Donald Trump's former personal attorney for a couple days, but then after these couple days, she's moved to a minimum security prison, which would never happen for a child sex trafficker of her stature. Allegations of thousands of young women trafficked by Miss Maxwell and Mr. Epstein. They don't even deserve that. Maxwell and Epstein. Also, it allegedly came out that President Donald Trump's name was in the file a lot of times and had to be redacted to the point where they had to put a lot of people to work to try to find any of the references to the president within these files so that they could be redacted. So even if these files come out, we may never know who was actually in these files, especially if it comes down to someone like President Trump, right? He's not going to let us, he will make sure that it is all redacted, right? So, and again, it's all allegations. We don't actually know. There's plenty of people's names that have been alleged, including former President Bill Clinton, among others. So we don't actually know, and that doesn't mean that you're guilty just because you might possibly be within the files. But it definitely doesn't help that you are associated with child sex traffickers. That definitely does not help. It's not a good look that you were friends with the guy for 15 years. So he also came out and said that he's floating the idea of a possible pardon of Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, as I mentioned earlier, when I said that the Cowboys would be doing the dumbest thing ever if they traded Micah Parsons, no, let me rephrase that. President Donald Trump, you would be doing the dumbest thing ever if you pardoned Ghislaine Maxwell. Okay? Don't be stupid. Don't do it. Don't even think about it. You've already thought. Actually, just go back, take that out of your mind, just ball it up, throw it into the garbage can. We'll act like we didn't even hear anything. Because, sir, if you make a decision like that and you think the backlash was bad before, when you just aren't releasing the list, imagine if the list doesn't get released and you pardon her. Oh, God bless. Oh, we might have a firestorm. The MAGA sect of the Republicans may eat themselves. This is going to be wild the next few weeks, right? And so there were some rumors that she was moved due to safety. Well, I'm sorry. Why the hell do I care about the safety of an alleged 1,000 children sex trafficker? I don't care about her safety. Y'all didn't care about Epstein's safety when you let him allegedly get murdered in jail. So, and if she's that worried about her safety, how about you not be a child sex trafficker? How about you not have been helping this? Well, you're a monster too. You're both monsters. But how about you not have been helping that monster do all the things that he did? Don't become Jeffrey Epstein's manager if you're worried about your safety. That's ridiculous. As would a pardon. So again, I know President Trump doesn't watch this show. That would be crazy if he did. But if he does, just don't go down that road, sir. Just don't do it. Anyways, in other Donald Trump news, we have the job reports came out. Yes, job reports came out and gave a bad job report this past week. The numbers, very, very low, 72,000, not good at all. Donald Trump did not like those numbers, and he had Erica McIntyre, the labor stats chief, subsequently fired. Now, look, we know that President Trump has a penchant for firing people he does not like. I mean, it was the main theme of his reality show. You're fired, right? So, and I know I did that in my Vince McMahon voice, but it was the point holds. But and that's fine, whatever. Get your people in. We know Donald Trump is want to do that. There's no point in even being worried about things like that. What I'm more worried about when it comes to this story is if you are so worried about job numbers and you're so worried about why jobs are not going up in the United States, why jobs are down so much, well, let's look at a couple different reasons. Let's go back to a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, when you started the ICE raids and the mass deportations. Well, first of all, you're taking a lot of people out of the workforce there. And yes, a lot of them did not have papers and were here illegally, so they may not have counted per se. But the ones that did maybe have some sort of paperwork would have been counted and aren't not. But more importantly, and not that that's not important, that's very important. But more importantly, something else came out today. Trump's Office of Personnel Management announced plans, get this, y'all, plans to cut 400,000 more federal jobs, aiming to reverse the significant expansion of the federal workforce under former President Joe Biden. Now, we know because we talked about this on this program with the Doge cuts and how they were cutting with a chainsaw instead of a scalpel like they should have been, and how a lot of veterans especially and a lot of hard, long-time workers lost jobs unnecessarily due to wanting to cut the deficit, cut the budget, which, by the way, they just turned around and gave a big FU to with the big, beautiful bill or the act which they installed, which is only going to increase the debt by $3 trillion, according to the Office of Budget. 400,000 federal jobs. So you already eliminated all these federal jobs before, and now you're worried about jobs being so down in the United States, but you're willing to cut 400,000 more federal jobs. The math ain't mathin', as the kids say, son. You gotta help me out. You gotta make the connections for me. I'm a very smart person, but I'm not making these connections, sir. Just ain't mathin'. Get it together. I mean, look at Boeing. 3,200 Boeing workers striked and walked off the job. I mean, Boeing is already having problems keeping their planes on the doors in mid-flight. Now they got to be worried about losing 3,200 people. I mean, the president, no wonder he went out and got that jet from Qatar. Makes sense now. Boeing ain't going to have enough people to make him an Air Force One by the time he get out. Oy vey. I don't even think I've ever said that in my life. Moving on. Also, in other news in the Congress, in the House, in Texas state legislature, 57 Texas Democrats have fled the state to New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, to cause a quorum due to the Republicans wanting to do redistricting on Donald Trump's word, because he wanted to get 5 more districts, 5 more seats for Republicans. You've heard me talk about gerrymandering before on this program. Gerrymandering is something done by both parties to try to gather more seats in districts where, if they redraw the lines correctly, they can gather more area, which allows them to get more votes, which in turn will allow them to get more seats in Congress, Senate, so on and so forth. The issue with gerrymandering, at the most part, is that a lot of times, and I've already gone through a whole segment on this before, gerrymandering is done based on racial divisions, racial lines. And that's where it becomes an issue. So while I don't necessarily agree that going to another state and, causing a quorum, that's necessarily the way to do it, I do get that when you are going to go out of the way to do something wrong and not, because technically this is happening mid-census. They are only supposed to do this every 10 years. This is midway between the 10-year census. So technically Republicans in Texas are not supposed to be doing this. So then why aren't the Democrats allowed to not do what they're not supposed to do either? Right? Not saying two wrongs make a right, but in this sort of situation, whatever side you're on, you need to protect your interest in that sort of situation. And that's exactly what is happening here. But anyways, they are also saying that they may send the FBI to track them down. And FBI Director Kash Patel approved his request, Senator John Cornyn and Governor Abbott's request for federal agents to assist in locating runaway Texas House Democrats. Wow. Ken Paxton said they'll just keep calling him like a jilted ex. Like, what, bro? Let it calm down. Anyways, other news. Department of Health and Human Services is ceasing its funding of mRNA shot development for COVID and flu. Human Health and Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced this move this week, explaining that the shots have ineffectiveness against respiratory viruses. Now, I don't know where Mr. Kennedy, RFK, was during COVID, but it seemed to me like the Operation Warp Speed, which was implemented by President Trump at the time, which created the vaccine, which has saved plenty of lives, it's shown, seemed to be pretty effective in saving lives. It did. Saved millions of lives, actually. Not to mention, it wasn't just COVID, but this mRNA pertains to flu vaccines, which people get every year. I don't get it, but people do. So we shouldn't be cutting funding for anything like this. We should always be looking into eliminating any types of viruses. Why would we want to? That doesn't make any sense to me. Again, the math is not mathing in this sort of situation when it was proved to save millions of lives. Moving on. We talked about this last week just to update you. Trump pulled $339 million from the University of California, Los Angeles over alleged civil rights violations. UCLA is apparently, the rumors are they will be accepting, and they'll also be paying fines to, I guess what else are you going to do? You can only fight so much, although UCLA makes a lot of money. But what I will say, as a UCLA Bruin fan, as a person who loves the University of California, Los Angeles Bruins, this is crazy to me because this is also a public university. So it's not private like Howard. Shout out Howard University. Private like Harvard and the other university we talked about before, which have a lot of money from private donations. Not that UCLA doesn't, but they don't nearly have enough as they do. Now you're taking funding away from public schools and research, and especially at UCLA, which is one of the biggest research institutions in the country, which are going to be able to eradicate viruses like we talked about, or help us in all types of other areas, curing cancer and so on and so forth. So it's one thing to go after private universities, a whole nother thing to go after public universities. And I think that the long arm of the law is extending a little too far now in these situations. So we'll keep you updated, but we do not know yet what's going to happen there. But we will keep you updated. In other news, tariffs, new U.S. import tariffs kick in for more than 60 countries around the world. Yes, at least ranging from 10 to 50%, looking to get countries to come back to talk. We've already done this song and dance. Didn't happen last time. We'll see if it happens this time. But apparently, a 50% in new tax tariff will be implemented on steel and aluminum, and a proposed 100% tariff on semiconductors, which are used to make cell phones and other things. So, when we look at these tariffs, which affect companies, which affect the bottom line consumers, which affect all of these other things, that's when you see Boeing losing, a lot of workers. That's when you see Amazon having all of these issues with worker rights and things like that. Because when companies aren't able to pay living wages to their employees, you're going to have strikes. You're going to have pickets. You're going to have people fighting back. And so tariffs only serve to create more of those issues. So what kind of solutions can we look at? What kind of mitigation can we look at when it comes to tariffs? Well, first, we could incentivize domestic production through grants. So instead of relying solely on tariffs, we could also try to increase grants from the government to incentivize more people creating facilities, creating production facilities, creating new companies in different industries, bringing back that American production. What else? How about instead of just having blanket tariffs, we negotiate targeted trade deals? We just did it with the EU last week. We talked about in this program. How about again, instead of broad swath like this administration has been doing, how about instead we start making targeted deals with our enemies, with the most important countries around the world, not with the penguins in Antarctica, right? How about we start making targeted deals that will actually bring money back to the United States? How about we invest in workforce training, manufacturing, semiconductor fabrication, pharmaceutical production, to ensure that we are bringing back American production and American jobs? How about we provide more of a living wage or more training to those people that may want to get into those jobs? How about phased implementation so that consumers aren't seeing spikes due to the tariffs? So small businesses who are complaining about not being able to afford inventory around the world due to these tariffs, so they can implement it in a fashion that they don't have to pass it on to consumers. These are things we can do to try to solve these, or at least implement these tariffs in a fashion that would be more advantageous to the American consumer, right? Also, in other news, and this will be the end of the U.S. news portion, and I've talked a couple times about how I was going to do a professor's Semanalmente on mass shootings in the United States. And in the past couple days, we had a couple shootings. So first, there was the Fort Stewart shooting at the Fort Stewart, Georgia, at the Army base. What has come out about this is the Fort Georgia soldier shot 5 of his fellow troops. All victims survived. Thank God. Prayers to them. But the incident triggered a lockdown, reignited debate over firearms in general. Obviously, there are nothing to be said here instead of just, aside from obviously us praying for the families, but there's a lot of other things that go into this. And we've talked about the mass shooting problem here, and how that is due to 2 main factors: the prevalence of guns in America and mental health issues in America. And that remains here. Now, it is a little different in the military, as I can tell you from being in the military. We are not as inspected So, for instance, if you lived on a military base where you were going on every day and where they knew where you were and where you had a pass and things like that, and where you're legally able to carry firearms, a lot of times you're not going to be checked while going onto a base. You are able to just carry your firearm on there in your trunk, whatever. So while that may be a little different here, mental health still plays a big part in here, and especially with the military. When you're dealing with PTSD and a lot of people coming back from war and things like that, and I'm not saying what this specific soldier was dealing with, I'm talking more in generalities on how we can try to solve these type of issues, because Sergeant Cornelius Radford obviously had some sort of mental health issues, because you're not going to just shoot 5 people in a premeditated fashion without having some sort of mental health issue. Now, if it was heat of the moment, revenge, defense, okay, those things are understandable. But when they're premeditated like this, that takes into play more of a mental health issue. So what are some potential solutions here, y'all? And this is going to differ from the CDC shooting that happened today, and we'll get into that in just a second. But mental health screening, y'all. We need more mental health help in the United States. We have a horrible tragedy of mental health in this country, and we do nothing to help it. And if we were allowed to have more mental health services for all, then we would be able to not only attack the root of these issues, but also catch a lot of these issues before they happen. Right? Background checks, firearm access. When we're looking at the CDC shooting that happened just today, I got breaking news just before I came on. It was supposed to be at the Emory University, it was first said, but then later it just came out that it was actually because CDC and Emory University are next to each other, it was actually directed at the CDC over the same mRNA vaccine or mRNA research that we talked about earlier. Apparently the gentleman, and these are just allegations, rumors at this point in time, was upset about the vaccines and the COVID and the mRNA research and all of this stuff. And that's why he went up to the CDC. So firearm availability, firearm access in this country is way too much. It's way too available for anybody to go get firearms, get around things like not being able to get it if you have a felony, things like that, buying them off of the street, buying them in non-legal forms and or fashions. But we also have a lot of checks and balances that are just not strong enough. There's not a lot of safeguards in place that need to be there. Right? And especially when it comes to the military, you definitely need to look at those mental health things and having those reporting capabilities. Right? Now, when you're looking at the CDC one, again, this was more of a person that was upset with how the government, the CDC, are handling things within, cases. And a lot of times this may come down to the person themselves having, family issues due to this or what have you. But maybe what could happen here, right, is, again, mental health, firearm accessibility, very important in these sort of situations as well. And prayers up, first of all, I want to say to the cop, the law enforcement officer who was injured, and also prayers to the family of the person who is obviously in critical condition there. And the law officers, the police did a really good, quick response here. So that was good. But apparently this is a very busy street in Atlanta. And apparently a lot of people saw this guy beforehand. So why aren't more people calling the police and reporting these sort of things real time when they're happening? Instead of pulling our cell phones out to record, why are we pulling our cell phones out to call the proper authorities to make sure that these sorts of things don't happen? Right? So those are the sorts of things that we need to look into. And again, prayers up to all of those involved. Not a good look at all when we have these mass shootings that happen on an everyday basis now. World news: the Gaza humanitarian crisis has gotten horrible, y'all. Absolutely horrible. Reports have now come out that Hamas is issued to kill hostages, or sorry, we'll get to that in just a second. That's the next note. Before we get to that, in this humanitarian crisis, there have been 73 Palestinians killed and 150 injured near the Zikim border while seeking food. This is horrible, y'all. These are innocent civilians trying to get food, trying to get aid, that are pepper sprayed, that are being shot, that are being, killed. These are horrible, horrible things that should not be happening. And it has already been horrible enough that they have put a blockade on the food to get to this humanitarian crisis. But now it's even worse that Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, then comes out and says, oh, well, this isn't in our strategy to make this happen. Well, yeah, it may not be in your strategy, jackhole, but you're still killing innocent people and starving children. And for that, no matter if it's in your strategy or not, it's still blood on your hands that you need to fix. So, again, this is just horrible that we're seeing this. They said today that there was aid dropped in by different countries, not Israel, to hopefully be able to get to them. And yes, I know when you look at it from the other side of the aisle, you say, well, God, the Hamas is also stealing aid. Yes, definitely true. That does happen in cases, but that's not all the time. And there are organizations down there handing out aid that are talking about the fact that the Israeli blockade and other things have caused it to get to this point. Now, back to the other news I was talking about. Because Hamas still has Israeli hostages, if Israel attempts a rescue for their hostages, which there's only 20 or less believed to be alive, Hamas has said that they will kill the hostages. This will only serve to inflict and engage this war even further. We cannot have that happen. That is going to make things so much worse. President Donald Trump came out today and said that Netanyahu needs to get his act together because he is saying that it is starvation as well. I appreciate that he came out and said that because 127 people this year have died due to starvation, according to Gaza's health ministry. So prayers up to all of those innocent civilians that are dealing with this humanitarian crisis. Israel and Iran will go back to talks. They were scheduled to go back this past week. I have not heard anything further yet, but they were supposed to resume nuclear talks with UK, France, and Germany in Istanbul on the 25th. Again, I haven't heard anything since that came out, and I don't know if it happened yet since now Trump is out there. It's getting worse and worse. We talked to y'all last week about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the blockades of food for months. Now food had to be airdropped in today. People getting ripped bags of lentil and rice, not even worth anything to them by the time they're getting it. 127 starvation deaths so far. Just not good at all, right? Then now Iran. We talked about the water crisis last week. A lot of bad things are happening over here. And now you have Benjamin Netanyahu coming out today talking about the occupation plan, saying that they want to have full military occupation of Gaza, including relocating the population, ethnic cleansing, and long-term security control. Now, it was previously thought this meant that they wanted to take over control, full control of everything, but apparently he refined this to just having control and then passing control off to proper Arab, political state where they could bring back proper leadership instead of Hamas leadership. Well, if that was the fact, that could have been done a long time ago. That would have already been done a long time ago. God bless what is wrong with these people. Clearly, that's not a very good justification. It's not possibly going to even happen. So, like, what are we talking about right now? What we really need to be talking about is that only 69 aid trucks a day have been coming in due to Israel's blockade. That's way below the minimum needed. We need humanitarian corridors where there can be trucks that come in every day to make sure these innocent civilians are getting the food that they necessitate, that children aren't dying. We need third-party oversight, an independent international body to monitor, supervise, and verify aid distribution. We need a ceasefire mechanism. We need Israel and Hamas to stay away from each other within this humanitarian corridor at the least, so that we can get this aid there and get the people that want to get out to get out. Some people don't want to leave. You can't just ethnically cleanse people and tell them to get out if they want to stay there. Now, I agree it's not livable there right now, but that still doesn't mean you can just take people out of their homes. And we need to rebuild the infrastructure there. No, not some Mideast Riviera like President Donald Trump was talking, but actually rebuild it there so that the people can move back to their home and get the local agricultural and water systems working again, things like that. And look, I had a very spirited debate last night with someone on this exact topic. And a lot of people are, and it's a very divisive issue, right? You're either Israel is controlling the United States and pretty much controls the world on these sorts of issues, versus you think that there is more need of a humanitarian point of view for this thing. The person I was talking to was saying, oh, well, this is, this is the way that it needs to be done. Basically just kind of taking a Benjamin Netanyahu Israel side of things in here. And so I said, yes, sure. But at the same time, Israel is the one that put in the blockade that wasn't allowing for the food to come in the first place, that caused the Gaza humanitarian crisis. So if they wouldn't have done that in the first place, we wouldn't even be at this point. Anyways, we had a very spirited debate. Shout out to that person. I'm not going to bring up their government on here, but a spirited debate that turned into a spirited session after that. Now, I'm not going to tell you what, but let's just say. All right. But so we'll see. But again, we need to have alternatives, y'all. We need to protect civilians at all costs. If you're going to try to find a two-state, solution, which I mean, there's got to be a two-state solution at some point. You can't just, and I know they've been doing this for centuries upon centuries upon centuries, but there's got to be a way to coexist without people having to leave where they've been living. And yeah, we could go even further into the debate we had last night, where this person was saying, well, that wasn't their righteous home anyways. And I'm like, look, we're not going to go back to the 400s. Okay, because they've been fighting over this land for the longest amount of time. So you can say each and both had controls over this land for different periods. What we need to say is that civilians are dying and we need to save them. Okay, we also need to look at Iran. How do we fix the water conservation there? How do we do desalinization, recycling? How do we get regional cooperation within the Middle East so that there is more water and food for the safety of the civilians? We got to figure this out, and we got to stop. Obviously, we all know terrorist groups run a lot of things around there. Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, so on and so forth. 3 H names there. Very odd. But, we need to make sure we are coordinating better the United States with our regional allies. Having diplomatic back channels, strengthening our forces around the Middle East and with our partners there in mutual deterrence agreements to make sure that things like this, aggressions like that, do not happen. Because then what happens next is China and Russia. And don't think it's not going to happen, because it is. Russia already has been coming out about nuclear weapons, so much so that President Donald Trump authorized 2 nuclear submarines to go outside of Russia on patrol in case Russia does something crazy. So while you have Israel and Hamas on the Gaza Strip, you also have Russia and Ukraine, and they're doing these same sorts of issues, these same sorts of back and forth. Will we, won't we, ceasefire, no ceasefire? But what we need to know is that these are just facades, y'all. Russia, China, these terrorist groups, North Korea, they are using these things as avenues to try to topple the United States. Well, look, I support President Donald Trump sending those nuclear submarines to patrol Russia. Tape up your tits and tango, Vladimir, because we ain't got time for this bullshit. All right, Russia, we ain't playing these games. We know we can beat you. Now, we also know you have MAD, mutually assured destruction. We know you got the dead hand policy, which means that you'll set off a nuclear war if attacked. So that's why we don't attack you. That's why you don't attack us. But don't get it twisted. Because the United States will win that war. Now, yes, millions of lives will be lost. Hundreds of millions of lives will be lost on both sides. But the United States will win that war. Now you look at Russia and Ukraine, right? We keep talking about this. Finally, it came out today. Putin has said he wants to end the war. How many times have we heard him say that? Now, apparently, it also came out today that President Donald Trump is going to meet with Putin in Alaska next week. Possibly even Ukraine will be there. So hopefully we do see a ceasefire. But even when this happens, how long do those things actually last? Right? So what do we need to do in these sorts of situations? Because we can't have Russia taking over all of Ukraine. They already want 50% of what they've taken, and they wanted more, but luckily Ukraine is holding the other 2 provinces at this point in time. We need to renew strategic arms talks with Russia. We need to have a new treaty between us and Russia. We also need to have a new treaty between us and China. We also have to have multilateral communication and partnerships between us and NATO and us and the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Korea. South Africa, excuse me. Let's talk about that. President Donald Trump and the European Union have come to an agreement on trades and on tariffs after Donald Trump threatened 30% tariffs. They have now come to an agreement, and this agreement will allow them to all put in different amounts, but all put into the defense fund for NATO, and this will also allow for the different levels of tariffs to be set and the different trade machinations and adjustments that are needed to come into play to reduce that deficit between Europe and the United States. So that just came out today that Trump was going to reduce the tariffs to 15% on most goods, including automotives, and that the European Union pledged $750 billion in U.S. energy purchases and $600 billion in U.S. investments. Yay, win, right? As well as $550 billion coming from Japan. Yay, win, right? Hold up. Hey, when there's haters, they be talking too soft. Hold up. Hey, you got to watch out on these. You got to watch out on these. When I read further into that Japan investment, it turns out that a lot of that $550 billion would already be rolled into what they're already paying to us in terms of trade deficit already, the 750 that they, or 650 billion that they provide every year to the United States for those sorts of things. So these blown up figures may just be figures that were already being given to the United States. So we need to wait and see what actually happens with these investments and what that actually means going forward. Now, looking at Russia, Ukraine. last news of the evening here. But obviously, as we were supplying Ukraine with Russia, a new shipment is going to go out, approved by President Donald Trump and the Republicans, to support Ukraine, as well as missile systems to Israel to protect from Iran. So now we're giving out a lot of our weapons. But anyways, it came out today. Donald Trump has shortened the Russia ceasefire ultimatum from 50 days to now just 10 to 12 days or 2 weeks, as he is wont to say on everything. We'll see if that happens. His 2 weeks never usually pan out, but he says a failure to comply will prompt new sanctions and secondary tariffs on Russia. Russia has come out and said, as Iran has, that their economy can withstand that. Now, I'll tell you, their economy can withstand a little bit, sure. But if the United States were to kick into full gear all kinds of sanctions on Russia and Iran, they definitely would not be able to keep up with that, and it would decimate their economy in the long run. All right, a couple other news notes here. U.S. and China have emerged in trade talks. U.S. and China are meeting in Sweden ahead of the August 12th deadline to avoid new tariffs. Also, Donald Trump is assisting in the Thailand-Cambodia ceasefire talks. So if you didn't hear about this, another possible border war popping off, as Thailand and Cambodia have had border clashes that have displaced 168,000 people and killed 33. These ceasefire talks are meditated by Donald Trump, ASEAN, and the United Nations. And we also need more diplomacy, independent diplomacy, involving officials that can be more neutral when it comes to things like ceasefire agreements and or negotiations between countries. Because if not, then we are going to get the things that China and North Korea are doing. Did you hear that North Korea also gave the United States a nuclear ultimatum? Yeah. North Korea came out, Kim Jong-un's daughter, the future president of North Korea, came out and said that we need to accept the new nuclear reality. This followed the increased sanctions and military that Donald Trump put out there. So what do we do here? Now we're going to have more talks with North Korea, because we're going to have to come up with some kind of treaty between us and North Korea. We can't have that happen as well, because they are nuclear capable as well. We need to have denuclearization talks around the world. We need to have freeze for freeze proposals, reinitiating moratorium-based negotiations where us and these other countries have these agreements where these nuclear weapons are not to be used, and that we're not going to keep producing nuclear weapons. It's fine that we all have nuclear. It's not fine, but it's understood that everyone has nuclear weapons. But we have to find a way to get away from not using those nuclear weapons, because things just devolve after that. And all it's going to do is we're going to continue to one-up each other, right, until the end of time. Look at China. China, if y'all didn't hear, y'all, has a new J-20 stealth jet. And you're like, whatever, we got our own stealth, the U.S. Yes, our stealth jets are still better than China's. But let me let you in on a little secret that you didn't know that happened this past week. There's a strait around the Taiwanese, Japanese, Chinese area. It is a strait that is monitored by 4 different countries. The aforementioned, right? China, Japan, Taiwan, United States, even the Koreans. They flew this stealth jet through this area and were not noticed by anyone, not even the United States. That means they built a stealth jet that not even we were able to recognize. This is how bad it's going to get in the future. We need to start having talks and figuring things out. We cannot be fighting with all of these different countries around the world, because it might be one thing to fight Russia and beat them one-on-one. It might be one thing to fight North Korea and beat them one-on-one. It might be one thing to fight China and beat them one-on-one. It's a whole new ball game. If it's us versus all of them, aka World War III. That's what we do not want.
Subscribe on YouTube at Ball and Buds for sports and entertainment live streams and videos. Boom.